I don't just want to blame everything on the club and talk about supporters and talk about culture, because Frank does. I think we have to be objective enough to have a go at Frank or be critical of Frank and look at the issues at the current team, because that I think we could go around in circles about that, or at least have a deep conversation about that. But, is it all Frank's fault, and what is he doing wrong at the moment? Because there are several elements to get into in terms of in-game management, sort of what's going on with the training. I think that's a really interesting aspect. Someone's stating that, I think it's over Twitter, I saw a conversation with people saying that maybe he's overtraining the players and that's why they look so fatigued over the Christmas period. What do you think is going wrong? Because there clearly is something that the dip after that 17, whatever you say about that 17 game unbeaten run, the dip in performances and just every area of the pitch has been staggering.
Yeah, it has. I mean, for what's going on in training, I genuinely don't know. So it'd be pure conjecture, and I don't want to get sort of bogged down and say something that then someone can bring up that I've said in 6 months' time, where I honestly don't know. I think fixture congestion has become an issue, but on the flip side, I heard Gary Lineker talk about it. He said that players can play once every 2 days, and that would be okay for a short term. And I get that, to be honest with you, because these guys are elite athletes, and I think that with especially the depth of talent we have, you could probably get results every 2 days for a short period, not for much longer. I think with Kai and Timo, obviously they don't really play. They get the winter break in Germany, so that's something that they're having to learn is not what happens in English football. But apart from that, I'm not too sure. On the pitch, it seems like substitutions are predictable. I think a lack of plan B is quite obvious. I don't think a plan B counts as let's put Giroud on and cross the ball in. That to me is not a plan B at all. I think if a plan B to be effective, you need to be able to switch up the formation effectively and open channels of play that you can see but are currently not being utilised, and then try to get the ball in the box or whatever. And I'm not seeing that at the moment. But again, I don't know what's going on in the training ground. I just don't know. But we'll see what happens with the break. Obviously, I expect Morecambe, when we play Morecambe, that will be a heavily rotated side. And then we play Fulham, who are obviously a weaker side in the Premier League. But, every team in the Premier League can beat you if you're not on your game. So that's about as much I can say on what's going wrong. There are obviously tactical issues. I still don't know if Frank knows what the best formation is for the squad. I don't think I know what the best formation is for the squad, though. So it's a criticism that I can put on him, but I can't, rebuttal it with my own idea. So that I'm sort of stuck in a quagmire. I don't know what your thoughts are on the issues, maybe tactically.
Yeah, for me, I think that the formation one is a funny one, because I feel that the best formation is always the one we're not playing if we're not getting results. So currently I'm hearing that the 4-2-3-1 is suddenly the best formation. At the start of the year, when I think the last time we spoke, we were playing the 4-2-3-1 and people were really frustrated with that formation, and then it was the 4-3-3, and Frank stuck with that. We've seen, I think, almost every formation under Frank Lampard, with the exception of a classic 4-4-2 or a diamond formation. Pretty generally, we've mostly, we've seen a three at the back system. We saw that a lot last year. I mean, it was a criticism last year, right, of Frank, that he didn't settle on a formation, and that there was a lot of flexibility there. Once again, now results have turned sour. People are then asking for more flexibility in terms of formation. I still feel that the 4-3-3, just in terms of modern football, I think it works a lot better. And I also feel it suits a lot more of our players. Now, when we talk about Kai Havertz and Timo Werner, you get into this issue because people say they're not playing in their best position. I read a stat about Timo Werner that 78% of his minutes last year for Leipzig was as a central striker. He didn't play tons on the left, although there were times where he did play off sort of Poulsen for Leipzig, and that worked very well for him. We haven't seen a lot of him there for Chelsea. I think 62% of his minutes have been on the left wing. So that's been an issue. But then as a manager, you go, well, aren't I supposed to create a system that suits the majority of my players rather than just one or two players? And then you get into this whole system of, well, if we focus our team on Kai Havertz and Timo Werner. Some players like Kai, who, for instance, is still getting used to English football and, could take a couple of years to get used to the Premier League, same as Timo Werner. Then you have issues with other players in the team as well. So I think that it is a difficult one and a difficult conundrum for Frank to get into. I maybe would say if you're looking at defensive solidity, I'd maybe go at a 3-back system, potentially. And because I think the issue Frank has consistently had is transition. And it doesn't mean that one formation is going to solve this, because the issue I have is I've seen similar issues in every formation Frank has played. I've seen transition issues in a 4-2-3-1, a 4-3-3 and a 3-4-3. I've seen a lack of creativity in all of those formations. So I think Kante, where do you play Kante and optimise him? I think that's been an issue in all of them as well. Who do you play alongside Kante? I mean, I'm not too opposed to playing a 4-2-3-1. He hasn't really done this with Mount playing alongside Kante in a deeper role, in a retractive role. That's one of the things he hasn't tried, right? And then you play Kai as the number 10, because I feel that Mount works a lot better from deeper positions, as we saw. I mean, it's not that deep, but I think about the pass he played against Aston Villa, right? He came from a deeper position, was able to play the ball into Olivier Giroud, and then it got into our 4 players, and then you got Ben Chilwell on the overlap. I would like to see Mount play deeper, because I think, think about the pass he played for Callum Hudson-Odoi against Rennes. And I feel there's a lot more mobility there than playing a Kovacic who's hit or miss. Sometimes he can look brilliant and you think, yeah, this is the answer in midfield. And other times he's just ineffectual, like he was against Man City. I think we know Jorginho's time is done. So that's if I was to sit here right now and go, because you want to keep the most attacking players in this team. I do worry with a 3-back system, you're going to have to force one of those attacking players out on the bench. And I don't want to lose a Ziyech. You don't want to lose a Hudson-Odoi. Potentially, at times, you can rotate where maybe you shift Ziyech centrally in a 4-2-3-1. You play Callum on the right, Pulisic on the left. So then you can play all those players, right, behind a central striker. I don't know as I say, I think this is not an easy solution. And I think anyone trying to sell you that it's some sort of, this is the formation that's going to work, I think history just proves you wrong, that it's been problematic whatever formation he's played.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, the Mount at 6 has been something I've banged on about for about 6 months now. I had a conversation with Goldberg, I had a conversation with loads of people where I've said repeatedly, I see Mount as like a better sort of Jorginho Wijnaldum almost, that hybrid 6-8, that Mount is so good. I really like watching Mount play football, and I think he's integral to the side, but he's not a number 10. He's just not. I mean, he may have played there when he's younger, but evidently that is not the role that perhaps suits him best now. I think alongside Kante, that would be really quite useful. It's definitely interesting to see anyway. I mean, Christensen also plays DM sometimes for the national team, and perhaps we could see that happen, but I feel as though if fans see that, they are not going to like it one bit, even if it could work. It might be worth an experiment, perhaps. Because he does actually do a really good job there for the national side. Sometimes I think about with a 4-2-3-1, if we were to play like Pulisic, Havertz and Hudson-Odoi, then I would think about maybe Giroud up top because of the way he's able to bring those players in. Or maybe have Timo just behind Giroud, and then Giroud can sort of play those passes that he's so good at. But it's so hard to pick like a defined starting 11 for me anyway, because I want to see Kai Havertz play, but I also want to see Ziyech as a 10, because I think we're lacking those, unlocking passes in the midfield that Ziyech quite clearly has the capability to do. Plus, he's comfortable shooting from distance, whereas it's only Mount that does that. But apart from that, we can have this conversation. We've got so many good players. How do you fit them into a system that works? You can't fit them into one system. Well, if you're going to, sometimes, you can really switch things up, because we have players that are on the fringes of the squad, like Marcos Alonso, who, when they're in a certain position, they are outstanding. That is what I mean by switching it up, because it's throwing in a curveball against a team that has no contingency plan for that player. Marcos Alonso is atrocious at defending, but he is not atrocious at attacking. And that, for example, could be a curveball that teams don't anticipate. I think people know that if Tammy's coming off, Giroud's coming on. I think we need to maybe be a bit smarter with that. I also think formations are, you spoke about 4-3-3. I agree. I think for modern football, 4-3-3 is perhaps the most effective. But City play, I watch quite a bit of German football. I follow Union Berlin, but I see a lot of how Bayern play, and their formation is really quite fluid. And that's something that I haven't seen as much. I see the left and right wing swap over for Chelsea, but that's about it. And then, veering away from formation, I think there seems to be an issue with football generally, but I see it at our club, is that people expect youngsters to be world class straight away because of how fortunate we've been to see the likes of Haaland and Mbappe and Sancho and even João Felix now. But it doesn't always work that way. Actually, rarely does it work that way. Do you know what I mean? You look at João Felix, for example. He's having a great season at Atleti, but last season he was poor. And when I say poor, he was very poor. He looked like a waste of money, if I'm honest. And then I was thinking about it today, right? You look at Lewandowski. He's 31. He's just now established himself as the best player in the world. It takes so, because in 2010, like 10-11, he was linked to Blackburn Rovers. Players, and that was him at 21. Look at Bruno Fernandes, who's out on the fringes of European football in Portugal. 18 months later, he's arguably the best midfielder in the world at the moment. It just takes time, and I think that's the whole crux of this issue. Is we have things that we can talk about: formation, who's going to play, who's going to leave, who's going to be the manager, but it's all a matter of time and perspective. And if you're not willing to give any time to certain players, then obviously your perspective's different. Therefore, the outcome that you're looking for is going to be slightly different to other sections of the fans that are willing to give managers and players a bit more time. And, you and I, essentially what you and I are doing right now when we talk about formations is trying to work out a way for Chelsea to get out of this sort of slump. But firstly, that's really hard to do. Secondly, I think the club, I don't know if they do, but it'd be really useful to maybe think about sports psychologists, because that could have a massive impact on the club. Because it seems as though at Chelsea, and I'm sure it happens at other clubs, but I think of Morata as a prime example, Torres as another one, where players have confidence, like their confidence knocks, and then it seems so hard to rebuild it here. But now you look at Morata, he's been outstanding this season at Juventus, genuinely. He's looking like the Morata I thought was going to come to Chelsea. So there are so many things that we need to improve on, that we can talk about, that need to be worked on. But at the end of the day, it's pure speculation, and genuinely the only real thing that we can do is just give the players the time to develop, really. And I think that once certain players leave, I think that might be beneficial in the sense that then they won't be considered. Because even you look at Jorginho, right? He's playing less, but you still have to consider him because he does have attributes that are useful. And so I imagine when he leaves in summer, that maybe might free up a bit of more space for Billy, for example. But yeah, it's such a tough one at the moment, isn't it? Chelsea Football Club is not an easy talking point, but it'll be interesting. I don't think we're going to bring anyone in January. I would be quite surprised, but I'm interested in the outgoings, to be honest.
Yeah, the outgoings for me is the key part of this window. It's about squad management. It's about trimming the squad. It's about certain players, like we just brought up Marcos Alonso, but I feel that's an obvious one that has to be on the way out. Especially when Frank, as a coach, you got to back him, right? He's quite clearly, since West Brom, I remember we spoke about this because it just happened when you came on the channel before, and it's amazing how that's been a very clinical decision by Frank Lampard. He's not been in a squad. I don't think he may have been like the old Champions League squad, but he's not been in a Premier League squad since that West Brom game. So it was quite clearly a cutthroat decision. You're not part of my plans anymore. You've disrespected me, and as well, I think on performance, it was one of the worst performances I've seen from a Chelsea player in some times. But that needs to happen this month. And I feel when you're hearing reports that some of these outcast players are maybe causing problems behind the scenes, that isn't going to help the head coach when we're going through a difficult run. And he's not going to consider those players because you're not part of my plans. And that's an issue as well, is when you have a constant revolving door of managers, you see it so often with players who we sign for a big fee and you're like, this is going to be a massive player for us. And I think the quality just wasn't there. But I look at Bakayoko, for instance, who I felt was starting to get better under Conte. Like the FA Cup final, I thought he had a really good performance. But then Conte leaves, you bring in a coach like Sarri who doesn't want your typical DM anymore, doesn't suit Bakayoko anymore, and suddenly he has to leave.
It's interesting, like that you mentioned about certain players causing issues. And I was just thinking about it then, like how I imagine it to be the sort of circles of and spheres of influence at the club. You sort of have the Sarri boys, sort of Emerson, Jorginho, Kovacic to some extent. Then you've got the youth lads, Tammy, Reese, Mason, Hudson-Odoi, Gilmore, Tomori. And then, you have the German lads that have come in, Timo, that are working their way, and obviously Rudiger as well. I think about it as though in each of those circles there are disgruntled players. And how much, again, this conjecture, how much does that impact those players? And then when Kepa as well, I mean, it can't be the most enjoyable environment to be around with so many players that are disgruntled. And that's the problems of having such a swollen squad, and they all need to kind of get out in the nicest way because I want to see all of those players have successful careers. I like seeing footballers do well regardless of the team they play for. It's quite nice to see people succeed. I'm happy to be one of those people. But there's clearly some sort of issue in the squad, and there are multiple players that have influence in multiple spheres. And when that happens, I think then there's a general consensus that things aren't going very well. Because I imagine that Tammy, Hudson and the rest of them are not particularly happy with the situation that Tomori is currently finding himself in. I imagine that some of the Sarri boys are not particularly happy whatsoever. I imagine for Kai and Timo it's quite tough coming in to find their sort of way into the squad and working their way into meeting people. He's been outcast, Rudiger obviously. I don't know what it's like for Mendy with Kepa around. It must be quite tough. And then, where do you go from there? It must be really quite hard to manage that. And that's a part of management that we've spoken about Lampard's managerial naivety sometimes, and that's to be expected from a young manager. But sometimes I can't help but feel like managing those sort of social issues within the club is actually harder than what's going on the pitch, because you have to solve one before you solve the other, really. And that must be a really genuinely tough job to do. And even if Lampard goes, that's going to exist because there are going to be disgruntled players in such a swollen squad.
Well, and I think the bloated squad now has sort of caught up with us, this short-term feeling. If you want to get the best representation is the bloated squad, is you have a jumbled mix of players of different regimes that currently are either young and they're trying to get into the first team, and they're trying to break through and get their chances, but maybe they're not fully ready to get into the first team just yet. You've got some older players, a bit like last season. I mean, I think it was good that we let both Willian and Pedro go, because I felt there were two players that had to move on, gave a lot to the club. But there are still ones now that sort of not that old, but, like the likes of Jorginho, who you still think can go to Italy and have a good career. Same with Rudiger, and have some decent years somewhere else. But Christensen's another one for me. Players who just aren't going to be long-term solutions to Chelsea. I mean, it says a lot that Frank Lampard's sort of second choice back four now was basically a first choice back four last season. That a whole back four, Emerson, Rudiger, Christensen and Dave, who I believe started against, they didn't start against Aston Villa, but I think they started against Sevilla. And it says a lot that was a first choice back four last year. That shows you how much investment there's been. That shows you how many players we have. Before we wrap up, I just want to obviously talk about the upcoming games and looking at them. Of course, Morecambe, FA Cup third round always feels like quite a pause button in the season. It's quite weird at this point. And maybe it'll be a good respite for Lampard and the players to rotate things, bring some fresh blood into the squad for fans to see and get excited about. There won't be sort of that feeling of maybe continuation from the recent Premier League slump. Who you're excited to see, because it does feel like, and we've heard reports that Frank Lampard has included a lot of young players into the bubble at the moment, and they're waiting to give them loans so Frank Lampard can give them time. I do wonder, do you think any player could have a Billy Gilmore type impact like last season, if you remember, where a player comes in, gets a few minutes in the FA Cup games, but then actually becomes a bigger player later on in the season. Do you think there's that potential this time?
It's tough because the players that I can imagine doing that are sort of the players that currently inhibit those positions are players I would want there anyway. So I look at Livramento or Simeon and I'm like, great, these guys are extremely talented players. But then we have Reece James, who is an outstanding football player, and I just don't think will be replaced, and that's fully deserved. I look at Lewis Bate, and I think, wow, there's the captain of the youth team. His left foot is unbelievable. He's extremely tenacious and passionate and so technically gifted. But do I play him over Kante, Mount, Gilmore? I don't know. I just don't know. And that's the tough thing. Tino, perhaps, but does Tino deserve long-term time over Conor Gallagher? I don't know. All of the defenders, I mean, Guehi needs to come in. That's just strikingly obvious. If Rudiger leaves and we don't bring Guehi back, I'm going to be extremely annoyed, because he's, without a shadow of a doubt, the best defender in the Championship. And that is not a dead league at all. It is an outstanding league full of incredible players, and he is head and shoulders the best defender in that league. You know, where do you go from there? Because the positions that I would like to fill with the youth talent, especially the best of the youth talent, we already have filled. Even the young strikers, you know, you've got Henry Lawrence and you have to forgive me, Jupp Harris or something. I can never, Soon Bell or whatever his name is. That guy, he's outstanding as well, right? And he's signed his scholarship last year, but let's be realistic, he's not getting in over Werner or Tammy, is he? He's just not.
You know, he's not. You know,
Exactly. And then you look at Kai, Pulisic, Hudson-Odoi, Ziyech. How on earth are other players meant to take those positions? It's just not going to happen.
Well, especially when we're going through bad and difficult periods, you know, as the pressure on Lampard at the moment. You know, I'm kind of the feeling that Lampard may put a stronger team out on Sunday against Morecambe than you usually see in an FA Cup third round.
I agree.
I think we need to start scoring some goals. And, you know, there's an argument I'd play Kai and Timo in this game.
Me too. Just to get them to score goals.
Like, you remember the Barnsley game? You know, that was a chance to get some fitness up for those players, and Timo needs to start putting the ball in the back of the net. I know there'd be an argument to say I'll rest him, but I think that just it's you know, you've got to get a positive feeling before we go into that Fulham game, because there's going to be a lot of pressure. Whatever happens, we could win 10-0 on Sunday. It's going to make no difference to what the pressure is going into that Fulham game, right? Because the pressure is going to be immense. 100%. It's on a Friday night. It's, you know, Chelsea simply have to win that game, and I know,
and they have to win convincingly as well. People aren't going to accept a win.
Well, this is not me talking about short term, long term, and my personal opinions are. I just know what Chelsea's like, and I know the pressure that will ramp up, and we should be putting Fulham away, right? The issue is, right, and 100%. I was thinking about this, and this could be something that helps Lampard, is the unpredictability of this Premier League season, how close it is. So the next few Premier League games after Morecambe are, so you got Fulham away, Leicester away, that's going to be tough. Wolves and Burnley. So those four are before we play, I believe, Spurs away on the first weekend of February. As unlikely as it seems at the moment with Chelsea, and especially because you've got Leicester and Wolves in there at the moment, that, you know, I expect very difficult games, despite Wolves being at home. If Chelsea put 4 wins together, and I know it's very easy for me to sit here and hypothetical and say that's what's going to happen, but the team's going to shoot up the league again, and suddenly things going into that Spurs game, the complexion of this whole season looks completely different again. Do you think that's what maybe as the board are thinking of and looking at and going, you know, look at Man United, probably the best example this season. They've had some horrendous results this year, but now they find themselves potentially in a title challenge. You know, Chelsea put a run of wins together again, as unlikely as it looks at the moment. And I don't just want to go off hope, because that's not, you need to see tangible evidence that we're going to improve under Lampard. But that may be something that's saving Lampard a bit now, isn't it? Because we're only 3 points off the top 4.
Sometimes it's just nice to enjoy a happy hypothetical, isn't it? Because everything's been so miserable. I mean, you know, and I look, you're bang on. You know, if we string together 3 or 4 wins, everything's different, and you watch the conversations change. But the thing that I like about this Chelsea squad, because we have, you know, focused on sort of issues, and that's rightly so. The thing that I like is that I don't think in comparison with other squads, mainly Spurs and United, we're as reliant on specific players, like one or two players. United are doing great, but and this is a big if Fernandes is out, they are not the team that they are. You look at Spurs, outstanding team, but the likelihood of Kane getting injured is high. And if Kane gets injured, Son is outstanding, but he can't cover for what Kane does, as well as his already exceptional output. And then you see a decrease in quality. You look at Leicester. If Vardy gets injured, they are done, because they are nowhere near as good when Vardy doesn't play. Wolves are an exception. I think they're pretty good, whoever they bring in. Liverpool, same goes, and City, same goes. But they're the teams I'm looking at and thinking, well, in a season that's as unpredictable as this, we're not even halfway through. I'm looking at their key players thinking it only takes like a small knock that could just put them out for a few weeks, and then that changes the whole dynamic of their season. And they could find themselves in a position that we find ourselves in now.
But also there's fatigue, isn't there? This is something I brought up, that I think that as the season goes on, and as you've mentioned, I think we fall ourselves into thinking we're actually further into the season than we are based on the time of year. Yeah. We've still, Fulham and Leicester, we haven't played yet in the Premier League. Those are the two teams we have yet to play. And then, of course, it goes back to playing everyone a second time. And I feel that the likes of Southampton, Aston Villa, Everton, and maybe even Leicester, but I back Leicester because they've got the experience now of being in around the top four race. Fatigue, injuries, congested fixtures, despite the fact that they may get knocked out of the FA Cup early and may still be only playing Premier League football, there's a lot of midweek Premier League games this year, because we still have to finish it by May because, of course, the Euros. So, and there's games being called off, so there could be games sort of backdated potentially for later in the season. So it's you wonder that could have an impact. And bigger squads, I do feel like bigger squads have never been more valuable, and that may also be something that could change the complexion for Lampard and Chelsea.
Sometimes I just feel as though the people that are complaining about what's going on now are the type of people to skip through the bit of the movie where the characters are in like turmoil, or like to skip the few chapters of a book when the characters are not knowing what's going on. For me, as someone that every day works in and around Chelsea, same for you, sometimes it's quite nice to be detached and to just watch the process with a bit of enjoyment, because football is a beautiful thing. It's something that people find refuge in, and it is an art form. It's not just a competitive sport, it's an entertainment. And we need to understand that sometimes the roller coaster doesn't go our way, and other times it does. And that's part of the journey, and why people love this game so much, and why it means everything to millions of people. It's not just we have to win, we have to win, we have to win. It's look at this connection this player's brought to the club. Look at that little pass. You and I just now talking about a Mason Mount pass from months ago. They're these little things that matter so much to people, because they give you a feeling that nothing else can really give you. And that's the beauty of sport in general, but football to a lot of people. And we need to understand that sometimes we have to accept that things aren't going to go our way, but it's beautifully exciting nonetheless. There's turmoil in the club, but there's turmoil at other clubs. We've lost actual football clubs that matter to their communities in 2020. I don't want to, be bringing out bigger issues and sound like some social justice warrior, but that's actually what's going on. And we need to just take a step back and realise, one, we're really fortunate. Two, our club is typically really successful. And three, we've got some outstanding players, and the club's greatest ever player is the manager. There are things to be positive about and things to enjoy, and sometimes it's just nicer to take a step back. I think it's worse if you're like you and I, where we're prominent in the social media community in terms of the fact that we are regularly in there. It makes things more clouded, but actually when you take a step back, you realise, that Mason Mount pass is a prime example. That's something that you've remembered because you noticed it and it struck a chord in you. And that's the beauty of football, that sometimes we lose when we might micro-analyse to such a degree, especially on social media. And it's nice to have these conversations now where we can pick things apart and we can talk about formations and transfers and bloated squads and youth players and this stuff. But it is worth mentioning as well that sometimes football is just the way it is, and we need to appreciate that beauty because it's been in our favour more often than not over the last 20, 25 years.
I think that's a great way to end this discussion, because I feel that there is a bit of humility I think that needs to be there with Chelsea fans, that we have been very, very privileged and lucky to support a club that has sort of at times broke sort of all logic in terms of the sacking managers, bringing in new ones and it working and winning so many trophies. And
yeah, it's rare, isn't it?
It's a rarity, and I think that as a fan, I feel like even though I'm only 23, I feel that I'm living on sort of everything now with Chelsea is a bonus because I've seen us win everything. So I'm privileged to support the club, and hopefully things will turn around. Jay, thank you so much for joining me for today's discussion. I'm sure we'll have many over the year regarding Chelsea, and hopefully the next time we speak, things will be a lot more positive and we can speak about some wins. Where can people find your work online? Obviously, I said earlier the Chelsea Social, which used to be at SW6 Daily, just to make it clear to people who probably don't know, it's changed.
Yeah, it used to be SW6 Daily. It's now the Chelsea Social, just a better name, really. We've also got the CFCW Social, which is now the biggest Chelsea women's platform on Twitter. And we're trying to really push that because Chelsea Football Club is not just a men's team. And if you're not enjoying what's going on with the men's team, go and watch the women's team because they're absolutely incredible. And people maybe need to put a bit more respect on women's football because it is not what you think it is anymore. It's a different game. And Chelsea have some players there that would rinse up most male footballers, so that's something that needs to be done. You can find me on Twitter as well, Jai Mcintosh, and man, you'll see me about, I'm sure, at certain points. But yeah, thank you for having me on, mate. Thank you.
No worries, great discussion. All the links to Jay's work will be in the description box below, so please go and check his work out. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch or listen to this podcast today. Follow me on Twitter at SonOfChelsea. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Follow me on Twitter. Have a great day, and I'll see you again